All right, that sounds good. I figure we'll get some quick introductions out of the way. Some of you might know me because I'm loud and obnoxious. Others here might know me. Oh no! I think I'm loud and obnoxious even by our standards. We did have the whole flying vagina thing that happened yesterday, so there was that. But anyway, I'm Lawrence Railey, and some of you know I've got this like obsession with Byzantine history, and I'm writing some books there and all that. But what you may not know, or at least if you didn't attend my presentation yesterday, is that I also have an obsession with AI. I'm a weirdo. I installed, Stable Diffusion on my local machine and started training custom models to do really stupid stuff. I unwittingly and unwisely gave the address of my local instance to some of my friends, one of whom made use of my platform to generate 6 images of nude Hitler. And I did not discover this until months later. So, if you have used Stable Diffusion before, you know that it creates a output folder on your machine where it stores everything that everybody creates. So one day I'm like, I need to get an image that I generated like a month ago and go look at that. And I go in there and I'm just scrolling through the images. I'm like, what the hell is this? So yeah. But in any case, I really enjoy working with AI. I especially work a lot with image generation and cover design, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But in my day job, I also work a lot with text generation. For my day job company, I'm under an NDA for some of that stuff, so I have to be careful what I say in that department. But suffice it to say, I've been doing AI for years. I love it. I create my own custom models. I've even tried to write a completely new UI for Stable Diffusion because if anyone here has used it before, you know the UI sucks like a Lewinsky in the White House. So it's pretty bad. I'm going to turn it over to my friend Lowell, the great and powerful Ginger Jew. Yes,
Hi,
I did.
I'm Lowell Jacobsen. On this panel, I have to give a disclaimer because I'm a lawyer. I am not your lawyer. Nothing I say today is going to be legal advice. I'm just going to be providing some observations, and any opinions I offer are solely my own and have no relation to any opinions that my employer may or may not have. I'm sorry I have to do that, but it's the downside of being a lawyer and talking about something that's relevant to what I do. I'm in my day job. I'm an IP litigator, mostly doing patent litigation these days, although I do a little bit of work in the copyright and trade secret spaces and trademark as well. So I'll hand it over to Jim.
I am not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV or anything. But I'm an IT professional. I've been doing it for close to 4 decades, and am a consumer of AI. And we are, as an organization, starting to dabble into it. Anything I do say, if you want to take it back and use it, do it at your own risk. Also, I'm putting my hat on. By the way, just for like, we'll be talking about scanning QR codes. Well, I'm sure it's safe here, but if you ever go to a restaurant or do anything like that, what people have been doing is they've been taking stickers and putting it on top of those little QR codes that the restaurants put down, and they are nefarious, and they will hack your equipment. So that is a trend. So I got a trend notice this week about it. So anyway, so if you don't know where the QR code is, probably don't scan it. So anyway, there's my public safety announcement.
I'm there we go. Got it down here. I'm Nathan Odle, and I'm an engineer and business person. I've been dealing with computers for about 40 years now. I love hardware and software, and of course also AI. I spend quite a bit of time with it. It's almost another full-time job for me, and I like to do research on my own, try to contribute to the state of open source software. So yeah, I appreciate Rob inviting me.
Awesome. So I have a kind of very informal agenda, but if you have attended my previous presentation or heard me speak, I'm very ADHD in that I will bounce around all over the place into crazy topics. Again, flying vaginas, nude Hitlers, it's a general theme. But we do have a little bit of an itinerary and some questions. And I think the first one, Nathan, you're probably going to jump right on, and that is, what is the role of AI in writing? How can and should we leverage tools like ChatGPT, Llama, Claude, etc. And will in this will tie into your presentation yesterday. Will AI ever be able to write a novel on its own?
So yeah, I guess I'll start. So yeah, we spent quite a bit of time yesterday talking about this topic, and I have to kind of put an asterisk here because I'm not an author. I know what authors do. I consume their work, but I'm not an author. But I have been working on a project with Rob, and we've been working on how far can we push current models to write, and I think the authors of the world can not worry too much right now. I think that the job is safe. I can also simultaneously say I think that there will be a point in the future where an AI novel will be indistinguishable from a human work. I think that's probably likely. It will require probably there's a lot of disagreement on this right now, but I'm in the camp that says the kind of reasoning that it takes to write a novel is probably down the road a ways. Probably will take architectural advances, and so timeline on that to speak to it. Maybe 20 years, 10 years, maybe. We have folks that think it's going to be next year, but
Yeah, and I agree with you there. It's probably not next year. There are some limitations, and you spoke to this a little bit yesterday, on AI in general and what it can do. And you can see in the image generation space that we just within like the last year kind of finally solved the hand problem partially. And so there are like these little idiosyncrasies and quirks, and the fact is that when you see those quirks, when you see the seven-handed guy, you immediately know AI did that. And in the text generation space, there are similar things where you're like, yeah, no human wrote that yet. And I think that there are so many of those problems. To your point, it's almost like an architectural change, I think, before that becomes possible. But also to your point, I'm bullish on the fact that we'll probably figure that out eventually.
yeah,
So I'm going to be pedantic and nitpick for a second, shockingly.
Yeah.
I think that you probably can have AI write a novel in the very near future, but I would say that it's not going to be a good novel. It's not going to be
No, that's
coherent.
100%
It'll
right.
be it'll be easily recognizable, but you can still generate a novel-length output with distinct chapters that have an internal flow. It's just not going to connect.
we
100%.
talked about that yesterday. And to do it in an automated fashion is pretty straightforward. Kind of almost there with the things that I've been doing with Rob, to be honest. It would take a lot of API credits or a lot of time on the local box. But writing slop, as we call it in the field, is pretty straightforward. But to write something that has the intricacy and cleverness, however you want to apply it, that takes a lot of planning and reason, and that's where these models fall short right now. There's tricks. You can do chain of thought prompting. There's a new training method I just read about called reflection training that helps. But at the same time, these all kind of feel like patches on the current transformer-based model architecture. So it'll be a minute, I think, before we have the real deal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I fully agree. That's kind of why there was a nuance in what he was saying earlier, in the fact that the asterisk was indistinguishable from a human being. Right now, it's very distinguishable. Again, you can see the same thing in the image generation space. I can generate all kinds of cool stuff in AI. It's very, very easy.
Like Hitler.
Yeah, not cool. Please don't do that. I don't give out my Stable Diffusion local address to anybody anymore, and there's a reason for
I'll
that.
give it out. I still have it.
Okay. If I may.
But yeah.
Yeah. So one one of the things I kind of got roped into running a D&D adventure last night. And so I'm like, oh crap, between my day job and coming here, and I had this panel. So I wrote the thing I was doing last night using AI. And so I have some of the characters things. By the way, anyone speak Goblin? Because if not, I put the English translation for their names. I noticed the hand thing, by the way.
Yep.
So I wanted pictures of the characters. So AI generated them. I'm like, oh, that's cool, because these were the little cards, the handouts for the goblins. I just went in there and said, no, this is what I was looking for. The plot line I used was loosely based on the Heart of Darkness. So these goblins, they were rated by player characters. They rated them, diminished their numbers, took their food, and they had to go get more food. And they were going to go get it from the town that they think it came from. Well, on the way there, they run into some orcs. They're going to beat them up. The dialogue for the orcs wrote for AI. It was, and I told doing Cockney, and it did. And then after that, after they defeated them, instead of the French village, the French town, home where they have the dinner, it was fairies. I actually had to write a welcome song, which I did not sing, but I read. The speech from the fairy queen was generated. The goodbye song was generated. I just tweaked a couple words. I'm like, perfect. It took a whole 5 minutes. And then I think probably for me, the most amusing thing was all these sayings that the paladin would say every time he was trying to swing at a goblin. The annoying paladin type sayings, the wicked evil things. I just had it all generated by AI, and I just picked one every time his turn was up. And I probably did that whole thing in an evening.
Yeah, and I think that right there is one of the most powerful uses for AI right now, both in the text generation space. You also touched on the image generation space. Right now, there is a problem with a lot of AI, which I had a lot of conversations with you earlier, where I call this the relationship injection problem. Whereas AI does not have a strong contextual relationship the way that our brain does. And there were a couple examples that I put out of that. But basically what you were doing when you're talking about, you're prompting for the song or this piece of dialogue or a picture of this particular goblin. What you've got going on there is you are injecting the relationship. You are telling the AI the relationship that you want. You're instructing it in that way. The AI can't do that on its own, but once you inject the relationship, you get very highly usable content. And the casual example that I use for a lot of folks on this in the image generation space, and if you've heard me talking about this before, I talk about it a lot. I call it the angel driving the burning car problem. How this works is if you go to Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Dolly, any one of those image generation programs, even Grok, even though Grok is kind of crappy right now, if you ask it to draw you an angel, it'll draw you an angel and it'll be pretty good. If you ask it to draw you fire, it will draw you fire and it will do that pretty good. You ask it to do a car and it will give you a car and it'll look like a car. It'll have 4 wheels, a steering wheel, a windshield, everything where it's supposed to be. But then when you start to combine these 3 elements, things start to get weird very, very quickly. You say, I want a car that's on fire. And now Midjourney, Stable Diffusion can generally handle that. In the early days, you got a mess of crap. You can say, I want an angel that's on fire, and you'll get like a demonic, whatever going on. And, hey, you're pretty good. But then you get to the 3rd level, the 3rd parameter, and you say, I want an angel driving a car that is on fire. And right now, in almost any image generator you use, if you do that without injecting the relationship, and I'll explain how that works in a minute, you will get a mess of crap. There will be angel wings coming out of the tailpipe. There'll be like St. Michael's head floating on top with like a spear coming out of it. I can show you all, real output after this if you want to see it. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it makes no sense whatsoever. So if you want the angel in the burning car, you have to inject the relationship, which is kind of what you were doing and what you were just describing. You have to say, show me a car that's on fire, because it can generally do that. And then you get the car that's on fire. And then you take what's called in painting. You say, here is the area inside the windshield of the car that I want you to draw an angel. Because it can draw an angel and it can draw the burning car, but it can't relationally do that together without it being a complete mess. So you select it in there and you say, put an angel in. Now you have an angel driving a burning car. Congratulations. But you had to inject the relationship into the model, into the AI model, for it to understand what you wanted to do. It couldn't create that relationship on its own. And I think you were talking about that, Nathan, more from a technical perspective. I'm talking about it more from a practical prompting perspective.
Well, from a prompting perspective, how much of that is just writing vague or general prompts as opposed to saying an angel in the driver's seat of the car with her hands on the steering wheel?
You do that, you still get a lot of really, really crazy output, because you say, I want an angel holding the steering wheel, driving the car, or whatever, and then you wind up with like a steering wheel on top of the roof, and the angel's up there, and it doesn't know what it's doing. So like the more detailed you get in this, yes, you can sometimes get around these problems, but a lot of them are basically just you have to supply the relationship, and then once you've supplied the relationship, it becomes easy. We had the minaret problem that we discussed yesterday, which is related to that, which is I wanted pictures for my cyberpunk Byzantine novel, and I had to generate like 200 images because of the minaret problem. That and some others. But the minaret problem is who in the room knows who conquered the Byzantines? Yes, the Ottoman Turks came in there, and and then the Ottoman Turks, like any conqueror, said, okay, we're going to co-opt the architecture and the culture of the people that we conquered, and do what we're going to do with it. And by the way, you see left-wing people, they never talk about how the Ottomans did that, because they're all nicey nice or something. But in any case, so now when these models were trained, there is a relationship between Byzantine architecture and Ottoman architecture, and it knows that. And so now it's kind of like, oh, you want the Hagia Sophia? It's got to have 4 minarets on it. So you try to tell the AI, and like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, a lot of them have a no field or no parameter where you can say, I want this, but not this. And I say, well, no minarets, no minaret, no Ottomans, no Turks. I mean, no kebab. I'm sorry. Remove the kebab. But you say that, and finally, after you like hit it a bazillion times, it's like, okay, now the 4 minarets turn into 1 minaret. But it still wants to put it in there. It's still like, I really want to give you this minaret. I know that you want it. So it's really hard sometimes with just prompting to get rid of that stuff. But you can quickly get around it by selecting the box where the minaret rendered, in Paint it, and say, make that clouds. And then all of a sudden, the minaret is magically gone, because you can try to, redo the prompt 200 times, or you can just select the box and say, make that go away. And that's the relational problem that we have in a lot of AI today.
Yeah, I think just a comment real quick. Probably good news for people trying to make pictures of angels in burning cars. I'm guessing I haven't done a ton like under the hood with image models, but that sounds like a training data issue maybe, or some limitations of clip. And so I think that is probably not going to be as limiting for as long as the other thing we were talking about, yes. Which was and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the newer models that are using more recent iterations of clip to be able to maybe nail those a little better. It's a very small model that they're using in there. Yep. That does that, and then also the training data for producing the captions, because those are all automatically generated, not human generated. So if you think about that, if those relationships don't make their way into the training data, then the model's not going to learn about those relationships. So, and those things have progressed pretty reasonably well. I think I mentioned to you a model yesterday called Flux, and I don't do a ton in this space, but I was helping Rob.
Yep.
And I was playing with Flux, and it's quite good. You should maybe give it a try. But that'll probably you'll probably not have that struggle so much, if I'm guessing, within the next 12 to 24 months.
Potentially, and the training definitely helps because the earlier iterations of these image generation platforms couldn't even do the burning car correctly.
Right.
Now they can do the burning car. Now they can do the burning angel. They can't do the burning angel, or they can do the angel driving the burning car, but they can do 2 out of the 3 parameters. And I think to your point, if you took 10,000 images of angels driving burning cars, you wouldn't have the problem anymore. But you will have other relational problems. So I think it's more like this is a tactic for when you run into a relational problem with AI. This is kind of how you get around it. The other thing, and again, there's a question back there somewhere. Right behind your head, so I couldn't see it. That was perfect. Yes. Okay, so the question was, how does it do with just the driving relationship? And the answer to that is it used to be terrible, and now it's actually not terrible. It used to have a lot of trouble with where the driver was supposed to be, because in the image training set, you had cars that were being driven in Britain, and you had cars that were being driven in the United States, and of course you're driving on your steering wheel's on the other side of the car. And so a lot of the times the AI would split the difference and it would put the person in the center.
The hemisphere fallacy.
Yes. And it's getting a lot better. I don't see quite as much of that anymore. But sometimes you even had to use, inject the relationship to basically tell it, this is the side of the car that I want the person to be on. And to your point earlier, some of that can be done semantically too. You can force it. It's like you say a person driving a car, and maybe it puts the person in the center. But you say a person driving a car in Britain. Now, all of a sudden, now you're supplying a little bit more relationship to it, and now it knows, okay, I was supposed to put the driver over here. So some of those problems you get around semantically. But to answer your question, it used to be really terrible. Today, it's not too bad. And that kind of ties in with what you're saying. These continue to advance, and so I've found that in general, with image generation models, you get a double relationship. You get 2 relationship parameters, and it will generally do that okay in most circumstances. When you get to 3, you start seeing big problems. When you get to 4 or more, it's like right out, and you might as well just ask for it to generate garbage. But it keeps getting better. Yes. Well, it depends on the training set that it's used, and again, you're a lot of these models are international, so people driving on the left-hand side of the road versus the right-hand side of the road, and it sometimes does not know which to prioritize if you don't supply additional information. So again, if you supply in the United States, then it knows, okay, well, 90% of the time the steering wheel is on the left, what we call the driver's side, and the opposite in Great Britain. But until you supply that relationship, it's kind of confused. It's like, I don't know where you want to put this person. I'm just going to split the difference, throw them in the middle. I think you were first. Yes. I think it will eventually be there, and when I say it's not there yet, that's still a qualified statement. Sometimes you can do that. Like if the training data is really, really good. Like if you say, I want a beautiful Latina who is voluptuous wearing a bikini and all this. You just applied a lot of different parameters there. It can generally do that because in the training set, there are apparently a lot of people who said, I want really beautiful, curvy Latina women. And that just popped into the model. And it's like, okay, yeah, I know exactly what you want, brother. Here it is. It depends. It depends on how you semantically parse it, and I'll let him go into that, and because I'm not even going to touch semantics when I got the ginger Jew and the grammar Nazi, same person by the way, next to me, but no, it depends.
I prefer alt-right.
Alt-right, yes. It depends on how you picture it, because you can say that a person driving a car is one entity, but the way that the AI is really looking at it, it's like, I want a car, and then I want to put somebody inside it. So that's two things. And it's, I want a person, but I want them dressed like this. Because you can go into Midjourney, especially, is really good about this. Stable Diffusion sucks for this. But you can go into Midjourney and you can say, beautiful woman. Give it no further prompting at all, and you will get a beautiful woman. You don't know what she's wearing. She could be wearing an elf dress. She could be wearing something like some goth stuff, a bikini. You don't know what that's going to look like. You don't know where she's going to be. You don't know if she's going to be on a tropical beach or the middle of a club or driving a car. So if you give it nothing, it actually generates pretty good content.
Well, how does it know what beauty is?
It really doesn't, and for that I will let Nathan explain, because he gets the underlying architectural nature better than I am. But suffice it to say, image generation models are really text models. They're very similar to how text generation models work. And essentially, it's not really generating the image first. First, it's looking at the tags. So it's been trained on thousands, millions, however many images that have been tagged with beautiful woman. And so now it has some concept of what that is, even if, crazily enough, humans will disagree all the time about what is beautiful, because apparently Lizzo is beautiful. I'm a little skeptical, but you can go to a random woman on the street, and if you say you are as beautiful as Lizzo, you're probably not going to get a good reaction. But the fact of the matter is that what these images have been tagged as, that have gone into the training model, does take a sense of beauty and kind of tell you at some level what that means. And I'll let Nathan talk more on that.
No, I think that was a good answer. I mean, I think you look at any characteristic, any color, anything, it's basically in the training data. And, there's a little more going on, but you can kind of think of, if I was going to try to teach you a new alphabet, right? And I showed you a card with 5 characters on it. And I said, okay, this character is on this card. And then I showed you another card that didn't have that character on it. And I say, okay, I wouldn't say it's on this card. And then I show you another card, maybe it's in a different position with another set of characters, and that character is there. And I say, okay, it's on this card. That's what I'm telling you. I'm not telling you this is that character. I'm saying it's on this card. It's on this card. It's not on this card. Eventually, you start to get the idea like, oh, that's the character that he's talking about. And so when you're doing this kind of training, like, that's a decent mental model of it. And so if you talk about beauty, you talk about any other characteristic, it will start to suss out, kind of in a comparative way, you could almost think about it, what that characteristic is. And if you're doing training of, fine tuning of your own models, and you create a training data set, that can be, you'll see that effect come up. So I was helping Rob, we were trying to do a fine tune for his Rex character. And I didn't have many training samples to work with, but it was very few. And so it was having a little bit of a difficult time getting the idea of what Rex was. In fact, it was starting to pull, so when I would train the model and then run it later, it was actually pulling the same style in. So because it was in that like pulp sci-fi painting type style. And so it's like, is this Rex? It's like, no, that's the style. This guy right here, this is Rex. So it needed more training samples.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I do want to get on, and let you be the last question before I get on the next subject, because I got something that I really wanted Lowell up here for to really help explain. But yes, what was your question? That was so okay. So let's segue right into that because that's exactly what I was going to go into. Let me restate the question a little bit for our streamers. So the question is about Chat GPT and the legality of the fact that a lot of AI platforms are trained on copyrighted content, and kind of what does the future of that look like? Which, by the way, again, was exactly what I was going to ask him. So that was a perfect segue.
So I'm going to answer a slightly different question and then circle back to it, which is that anybody who is, trained in art or writing, right? A human brain is trained on copyrighted material. So any author, right? Any fantasy author, you read Tolkien, maybe you read Robert Jordan, you are training your own natural intelligence on copyrighted material. And you generate an output that may be a pastiche of these things. That's totally okay, right? Nobody, I think, would dispute, as long as you're not ripping off blatant elements, and without getting too much into what that entails in copyright law. There are some tests for that, but the basic concept of using copyrighted material as inputs for a human is not controversial right now. So the step is that you are basically using it as inputs to an intermediate rather than to a human, and that's where the doctrinal difficulty arises. Unfortunately, I don't think that we're going to get a consistent answer to that question from the courts. I think it's probably going to be something where Congress is going to have to step in and answer it in a statutory fashion based on some sort of policy considerations, because it really does sort of fall into a gray area of, well, what are we allowed to do with copyrighted material? Obviously, you can buy a book, you can read your book, you can give your book away. The copyright license is generally exhausted upon a first sale. But as we remember from back in the 90s or the early 2000s, technically you're not allowed to rip your CDs into MP3s. People did it anyway. It was generally not enforced, but that is essentially putting the sound recording into a new phonorecord, as the Copyright Act uses those terms, which is not allowed without a license. Even though you own the phonorecord, you can't do that. So it's sort of falling into a technological gray area, which we see in copyright every so often, as the law and technology advance. So I think, unfortunately, it's not clear. Judges, as I see in my day job doing patent litigation, judges don't understand technology at all. It's very, very hard to get them to understand technology. Their clerks are a little better, and it's generally the clerks who are involved with this, just because the clerks are younger and more familiar with it. But it is rare that judges really can get it, or can get it even in the dumbed down fashion that you have to explain it to them. And which is, again, most of these judges didn't go to engineering school. They don't have technical backgrounds. They're generalist judges. They do immigration cases. They do criminal cases. There's no reason you'd expect them to be especially knowledgeable in these areas. And so I don't think we're going to get any good decisions or any consistent decisions that are going to allow us to draw anything. And because of that, that's why I think there's going to be pressure on Congress to sort of step in and say, this is what you can do as with AI models from copyrighted works. You may see copyrighted clearinghouses having addressing the issue explicitly, and I know this isn't like a judicial solution, but sort of a business side solution of having explicit terms of use in websites, hidden in the fine print. Like, you may not scrape this website for AI usage. You'd have that inserted into bulk music and like Getty Images licenses where you can't use these things for AI inputs. So I think you're going to see some of that on the business and supply side before you see anything from the courts. Well, it's actually inconsistency is one of the factors that actually makes the Supreme Court more likely to hear things. If you have, in copyright law, you generally have the Second Circuit out of New York and the Ninth Circuit out of California doing things differently, in part because, you had TV out in California and you had the book publishing industry, journalism, and Broadway in New York. So they had sort of different focuses, different plaintiffs in different cases arising in those different jurisdictions. And so, and there are still splits that are unresolved, but generally when you have one circuit saying like the law is X and another circuit saying the law is Y, that is much more likely to get the Supreme Court to step in and say, we can't have this situation in California and a different situation in New York. We need to have a uniform nationwide rule. And then of course with copyright in most instances, it's statutory. There are some constitutional issues involved with the First Amendment and perpetuality. But it is the kind of thing that even if the Supreme Court rules one way, Congress can almost certainly do something different if they don't like it. Yeah.
A quick follow-up before I get into the questions. And again, I know that you're not supposed to give legal advice, so take my question as semantically vague. But what advice
Charitable
would
interpretation?
charitable interpretation, very mushroom, in joke. So what advice would you give to someone who is using AI today? So you're using AI in those cards. I'm using it to generate covers. I'm sure other folks in the room have been using it for stuff when they're writing their books or their games or whatever. Like, what can we do to protect ourselves from future litigation or weird stuff that might happen?
So that actually is legal advice. So my answer is going to be pay a lawyer to answer that question. Generally, I will sort of speak in generalities, not even specific to this issue. Generally, you want to maintain a low profile, not piss people off, and don't push the limits of logic or the law. Basically, don't be a sovereign citizen when it comes to AI, because you don't want to be, the one in court making a ridiculous argument that the judge who already doesn't understand the technology is going to roll his eyes at, and it's going to get annoyed that you're wasting his time.
Yeah, I'll just interject here. I actually do an activity that I want to, we'll just say, leverage. And that is anytime I have a job opening and I want to look at my job description, I will ask, AI to generate me a job description. And I want to know what the rest of the world is looking for in this position now to see if I need to evolve. So instead of me doing all the research, I am having the chat GTP or whatever do the research for me. And I go, here's my old one. Here's the one it came up with. And I start looking. I'm like, oh, hey, what's this? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I better go look at that. Because, I'm managed now. I don't keyboard anything anymore. I haven't programmed in a long time. And so I'm like, oh, what the hell is this? I'm like, start asking, oh, that's the latest craze. I'll get that in the job description. Yeah, so I use that in a business purpose for leveraging the knowledge so that I can be competitive when I need to do when I'm looking for an employee.
And that's really awesome. I mean, there are a lot of uses for AI beyond just helping you write your novel or making covers. Let's get to some of our questions over here. I think you were first, and then Hans. So the question that was not a question, but was very informative, was that we have to remember the world is not the United States, as much as it would probably be better if it was. So other countries have ruled on it, and I think you were saying that a lot of them have ruled you can do whatever the fuck you want with AI, pretty much. That gives me a little bit of hope, because I do a lot of AI art and stuff like that, and I don't want to. There's a Supreme Court case 20 years from now, and they're like, "Yeah, Lawrence, we're going to throw you in prison and sue you for $5 million or something like that." So yeah, that gives me a little bit of hope. Hans, you had a question. Sure. So the thought there was that protecting yourself, save your prompts, save your change logs, save your models, whatever you can, and then maybe later you can prove to somebody, I wasn't trying to generate this, or I wasn't trying to do that, and these are my prompts. I own those. Hans.
Before, oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in before we get too far down the road. I think it's good. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a while before there's like any sort of certainty on this.
Yeah.
But I think it's useful to look at what's, kind of the environment around an eventual decision or legislation. And I've been thinking about this too, and I think maybe there's a few things going on. One is I've heard some people leaning back on some of the scraping cases that have occurred, right? So there was a big one, and I'm not a lawyer and I can't remember the citation, but where basically, at some point a scraper was taken to court, said, hey, you can't scrape our stuff, and the court ruled, no, you absolutely can't. That's out there. The other thing, excuse me, that I think is at play is kind of a almost like first mover type deal, where, hey, if we get this out there and it's happening enough and all that, it becomes a foregone conclusion type of thing. And obviously legislation and things reverse common practice, but it definitely seems like they're leaning a lot on the fact that make it useful to everybody, make it happen, and then that's going to definitely sway the environment when something eventually does happen.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. As the comment we just got was talking about how the rest of the world is not the United States, and I think if it looks like we're in a situation where domestic companies' models are at a competitive technological disadvantage because they are not allowed to scrape from copyright, to use copyrighted material in a way that models in other places are. I think you would see a more rapid change in the legislation to explicitly permit that.
That's one of the strongest. Sorry, that's a similar argument to the legislation that's been around trying to limit compute, right? So there's a law in California that I think is
you
on.
take my GPUs over my dead body.
Yeah.
Like I'm even going to make a Gadsden flag for the GPUs. You step on my GPU, motherfucker. No, you don't do that.
Don't render me.
Don't render me. I love it.
For a time there, when it was starting to look like AGI was right around the corner, like a couple years ago, there's a lot of people who thought that there's a pretty strong argument to be made, similar to Einstein's letter about the atomic bomb, where, hey, this is going to be really powerful, and if you limit the United States' ability to succeed in this front, and the other countries don't, you're going to put us way far behind. So I think that's those two topics are a little bit intertwined, I think, to your point.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. There's one last topic I wanted to get to. Then Hans, I will get to your question. I promise. I know that we bounced around back a little bit. I did want to make sure that we talked a little bit about ethics, and I'm actually going to be quiet because I'm too opinionated about the ethics of using AI. And you probably already heard me rant about this. Everyone in this room's probably already heard it. Do you think using AI to generate art, text, whatever, do you think it is ethically sound? Forget the legal argument.
Oh, Actually, we can talk about that because it's actually been a pretty, I wouldn't call it a controversy, but kind of a hot topic in legal circles over the last 18 months, where you have attorneys who think that the various AI model, ChatGPT or whatever, are research tools rather than text generation tools. So they'll say, give me an argument for this proposition with citing cases, and the model will hallucinate in many cases supporting citations. When the judge goes to look at them, these cases don't actually exist, even if the general proposition is sound. So you have attorneys, essentially using ChatGPT as a first-year associate to do research, but ChatGPT doesn't know how to do legal research. So in response, a lot of courts have basically required either an express certification or put it in their local rules that anytime AI is used, first attorneys either have to certify AI wasn't used, or in the alternative, certify that if it was used, its output was reviewed and confirmed by an actual practicing attorney rather than just passed on to the court. So at least in legal circles, the answer seems to be not so far as use is ethical or not ethical. Rather, the trend seems to be the use has to be disclosed when it occurs.
Well, well, just from a business point of view, I think it's not exactly the writing of novels or creating pictures. It's going to be the use of the data to further promote product or marketing or advertising, or just figuring out what the next widget needs to be to make you oodles amount of money, or actually just take a look to say, well, we got this now. Amazon's really pushing it. How do I know what you want next, right? And sometimes you're like, your vacuum cleaner is going out, and you're like, man, and you're thinking it. All of a sudden, next thing you do is you're getting bombarded by, advertisement for a vacuum cleaner. Like, well, how the hell does it know, right?
I-
So, but I think where's the ethics of that, of the eavesdropping, and because that's a learning model also, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when it comes to generative AI, on the ethical front, I lean back on, don't do bad things, and whether it's with AI or something else, don't do bad things. And so, kind of leaning on that, it's a tool type argument. It's really interesting to see some of the discourse around that, because that argument obviously has also been made in firearms, and I've kind of watched parties that they never would have made the firearm argument, but they make the AI argument, which is interesting. But I think it's what somebody's doing with it. Don't use AI to lie, right? And so whether you're making a fake video of a political candidate, or you're producing botted accounts for a social media platform, don't lie. But we already know, don't lie. It does allow lying to scale, which is the real problem, and that kind of goes back to the some of the copyright question too, because we had I was talking to someone making that same argument about hey, humans train on copyrighted data all the time, and someone pointed out to me, well, the difference is the scale, right? Like a human's output is X amount, and the AI's output can scale massively. And I don't know exactly where I fall on that argument, but a lot of the topics around AI really boil down to because we have laws in place that say you can't lie. We have things like that, but a lot of it comes back to AI enables a certain amount of scale, and so that's where I think the courts and everybody else has to get their head around this new environment.
And I like what you said, because it ties in very well with what Lowell just said, which is disclose, disclose, disclose. Tell people when you use it. If you're generating AI art, tag it with AI art. Like, people know it. If you used it in your novel, mention it somewhere in the afterword or something, like, hey, I used some tools to do this, or something like that. If you don't lie about it, my personal feeling is it's perfectly fine in many cases. I will get to both of y'all. Well, 3 questions. One last question for the panel, then we'll go for the three that had their hands up, and then you got your free hour. I don't want to cut too much more into it. The last question that I have for the rest of the panel, and again, I will be quiet because you've already heard my opinion on it, which is it's going to put out furry artists who do $7.52 plus your Starbucks gift card for a commission for a Twitter avatar. It's going to put them out of business. A lot of people are afraid of AI because, hey, it's putting a cover artist out of business. It's potentially someday going to write a whole novel, probably not a good one for a while, but maybe someday it does. What is the ethical argument in terms of the human front? Like, it's putting people out of work, or whatever. What do the rest of my panelists feel about that?
I think that's great. We don't have nearly the same number of farriers we used to. We don't have the telephone operators operating the plug switches. We don't have stenographers really outside the legal context. People do their own typing now. Technological change always results in employment change, and that's a fact of life. And the cure is worse than the disease in this case.
Okay. I think, okay, if it's all based off of learning, that means it can't come up with anything new. And where a human has the opportunity, well, if some of them have the opportunity to create something new, and that needs to be encouraged. Just, what was it? Everything's just a copy of what Shakespeare did. But there's opportunity to tell that different story differently and add something new to it. And if AI is all it is just it only knows and it can't extrapolate, no, then it's just telling the same stories.
So my answer to this question is kind of similar to the previous one, where I think it comes back a little bit to a matter of scale. I definitely agree that as AI currently sits, it's a great tool, and it will be for a long time. I think that's the foreseeable future. I have some creative folks in our business work for me, and they initially were kind of freaked out, right? Because like, oh, it can do this and do this, and I said, well, this isn't going to remove jobs right now. What it's going to allow is it's going to allow people to do more with their day. We talk about software development. That's one of the biggest areas where generative AI is used right now. A lot of these models have been specifically trained to produce great code. And so, when I talk to somebody in software development, we kind of talk about how the world could probably use about 1 million times more software as it has right now. And it's going to take a very long time to take up that slack. I guess the thing that we don't know is the future, and extrapolating out, okay, AI can do this, can do this, can do this. But when we get to the point where there's strong and cheap, that's a very important part, cheap reasoning ability, then you start to see something where you truly are, you have a potential to automate in a way that we haven't had before. And I think that's a scary proposition to people. When UBI came out, I think a lot of people didn't catch what was really going on there. The universal basic income thing.
Yep.
A lot of people said, oh, you just want to pay people to sit around. Well, if you look at who was lobbying for that, this was specifically people in the Valley, people in tech, because they kind of saw this horizon here where it's like, okay, we're working on this stuff. There could come a day here where we put a lot of people out of a job. And I think at this point, that's in the future, and I'm not trying to kick the can down the road, but it's a little hard to predict how it's all going to work out. And in general, I bet on humanity. Like, we've figured out a lot of things before, and we've made the world better in light of impending doom. So I think in general, it's uncertain what timelines are. It's uncertain how exactly it's going to play out. But I bet on us.
All right. Well, that's definitely awesome. That's a lot more optimistic than my view, and I won't tell you mine. Hans, Rachel, and then what was your name again? Mark. Okay, Rachel. Mhm. That's a very interesting observation, and it's a little bit of a take on kind of what we're doing in terms of ethics, but a different spin on it. So what Rachel was saying for our live streamers is that there's an ethical dimension of, are we outsourcing our own human judgment to the AI in some distant future? Like right now, we tell the AI what is beautiful. We had that question earlier. Is in the future the AI going to tell us what beautiful means? It's an interesting question. I'm not a sociologist, and I'm really bearish on that sort of thing. So you probably don't want my answer to that.
Well, didn't we have Google trying to tell us what World War II?
Well, yeah.
Yes, and oh yes, yeah, that was great. Google making sure that if you generated a Scottish gentleman, he was black, because we need to have proper diversity and all of that sort of stuff.
I think it was just trained on the last king of Scotland.
Yes, and the worst one was when somebody asked for an SS soldier for some particular reason, and it gave them a black Nazi, and that was just like, okay, Google, you done fucked up.
So on Rachel's question there, I think my first observation is a lot of people have already offloaded their judgment, right, to other humans, basically, and we kind of all see how that goes. And so I think AI could put that on steroids, right? We've seen some of this. We could, in the other direction, if we got good, strong AI, AGI, ASI, that was practical and good, then that could counteract a lot of the negative forces in society right now. So I know that we don't know, but yeah, 1 second. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, I suppose. But I think this is one of the reasons that everybody should really favor open source AI.
Yes.
I think this is a really important topic because probably the most dangerous thing would be AI that's developed, not in the public's interest, behind the scenes, in a way, because I think that's how you are going to get to a point where you have AI being used as even more as a tool for manipulation. And so if we do open source development, that brings everything out into the open, and people at least know what's going on, and there's some level of accountability. So I'm very much in favor of open source AI for that reason.
Yeah, same here. And I also want to touch on, Joe, I think you mentioned a little bit of kind of what was tying into some of those comments, which is the way that AI is conceived right now, it can only do what it's trained on, which means a human did it first. So a human kind of still has to do it first in most cases. I think we had one last question from Mark, and then we will.
We had a follow-up question here, I think,
Oh, yeah.
from Rachel.
They definitely are. Still, I tend to err on the side of disclose in the sense that I don't want to deal with the crap. But that's me. There was a follow-up question over there. Sorry. Oh yeah,
Definitely,
absolutely.
definitely.
Most AI platforms have feedback mechanisms to be like, hey, was this good or was this bad? Especially the commercial ones. The local ones, not so much, because the local ones assume you know what you're doing, you installed it on your own machine. But the commercial ones, they want that information and they want that feedback. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of uncanny valley type jarring stuff in AI. And we do have kind of the end of our time. However, if you have any more questions for the panel, please come up and we will definitely answer them. I've already overstayed my welcome by 11 minutes, so I will let you all enjoy your free time. I appreciate it, and a lot of thanks to my panelists.
Thank you.